Hello everyone, welcome to this sixth and unfortunately last session of the second part of Beyond Bohm, David Bohm and Philosophy. I'm James P. Barbieri, Associate Program Director here at the Bar Center, and I will be your host for today. As a host, I'm here to help you throughout the call, so any issues, technical or not, feel free to just let me know in the chat. Let me just very briefly go through a few guidelines for this call. Firstly, if you can please mute your microphone just to ensure good quality audio, but we do encourage you all to turn on your cameras. The chat will be open throughout the call, so feel free to use it to discuss any material that has been raised during this call or to share any ideas that you've had. Finally, this call is recorded for archival purposes, and for you all, you should receive the recording in a few days with a link. So we can open this call. Today we are honored to be joined by Marja-Liisa Kakkuri-Knuuttila. Marja-Liisa has been a professor of philosophy of management at the Aalto University Business School. She has taught courses in philosophy of the social sciences and other philosophy courses for business students. She has worked on the dialogue method and philosophy of science in Aristotle and contemporary notions of dialogue. Today, Marja-Liisa will be talking about Aristotelian metaphysical and epistemological reflections in David Bohm. With that, I will pass it over to you. Welcome.
Laita se, joo. Vai paksa heti ne kalvot vai paksa?
Vai haluatko puhua eka vähän?
Joo.
Puhu ensin vähän aikaa.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, hello everybody. So it's really great to have this chance to talk about some work I have done with David Bohm. I got interested in his thinking and philosophical assumptions because I have been working on dialogue and sorry. So I realized that to understand some of the things in his conception of dialogue, I need to go into quantum physics, but I'm no expert in quantum physics, and so my focus is very, very limited after all in my presentation here. So what I have studied is the philosophical, methodological, metaphysical, epistemological assumptions in his causal interpretation. And that means that I have not studied his philosophy underlying the conception of implicate order, which of course is very, very important. But I think there are very important, interesting differences between them. So, but today, perhaps unfortunately for some of you, we have to be satisfied with the causal interpretation. So I want to thank Paavo for inviting me to participate here, and Paavo is here sort of assisting. Okay, that's what he says. Yeah, and the real expert of Bohm. So let's start with my presentation. Will you, Paavo, help me with to put on the slides?
Over here, with the share screen is right there.
Yeah,
and then we like this.
Okay, thank you, Paavo. So the title is Aristotelian Metaphysical and Epistemological Reflections in David Bohm. And to say something about my... Yes, some technicalities.
Yeah, me voitaisiin laittaa. Tietysti mä nyt pistän tätä, että näen sit noita, mutta...
Joo, se on parempi niin. Se on parempi niin. Yeah. So some of my research interests have been the concepts of causation and explanation, both the realist and empiricist, and this is what we are going to talk about today, and Bohm's concept of causation. And then I have studied dialogue, ancient and contemporary, and particularly the Plato concept of which Aristotle developed further, and also some contemporary forms of dialogue. There's very interesting developments here in Finland, which is called time-out dialogue, which is spreading not only in Finland, but in some other countries as well. and then methods of theory construction. And this will be important today because we are going to talk about Aristotle's methodological ideas. It doesn't work?
Eikö? Mikä siinä nyt sitten on? No sit se on hetkinen.
Technicalities. Okay. So today we are going to discuss 3 realist elements in the causal interpretation of Bohm and Hiley. So the first one, which will be just presented very briefly for systematic purposes, more or less, is the argument from laws to object and properties. But we shall focus on the metaphysical causal realism. This is my claim that in Bohm and Hiley, the power conception of causation can be identified, and this is similar to Aristotle's conception of power in his Metaphysics and Physics. And second, I'm going to discuss the methodology and epistemology of intuitive intelligibility. This term, intuitive intelligibility, is taken from Bohm and Hiley, and I'm claiming that there's a that they use systematically a certain methodology, which is, and so you can see that my presentation is related to Professor Seeger's very interesting and informed and extensive discussion on intelligibility. But my focus here and interpretation is somewhat different from his, and I'm claiming that it's some similarity to Aristotle's methodology of saving the appearances. The Aristotle's methodology, I believe, is not very widely known yet. And it's something which has been worked out only since 1980s. So it's not part of the medieval theories and these kind of things. So it's these 2 latter points that we are going to focus on today. Okay. So just first a couple of words about realism, and then briefly the argument from laws to the existence of quantum particles and quantum potential and active information. And then a more detailed discussion about the metaphysical causal realism. And then the second main point, I have divided it into separate sections. So first, what is what I called here the methodology and epistemology of intuitive intelligibility in Bohm and Hiley. And then next, what is this Aristotle saving the appearances? And then I point to some sort of epistemological similarities between these 2. Okay. So this series of lectures, the term realism has been repeated very often. So I'm using here both the metaphysical aspect and the epistemological aspect. And the metaphysical aspect says that reality exists independently of the subject of knowledge. And the epistemological aspect says that the object of knowledge is accessible to the subject, at least to some extent. So the argument from laws. Yeah. So you can see I have borrowed from Paavo a slide which was originally made by Basil Hiley. So the point here for our purposes is that the terms in these mathematical formulas, the realist argument is that these terms do some real work in the mathematical formulas, and therefore they refer to something that really exists. So for instance, the quantum potential is an important term, and the quantum potential exists in reality independently of the human subject of knowledge. And then there's other symbols, M for mass and X for place, location. So there must be something which has a mass and a location. So that's sort of briefly what this first argument for realism is about. So I come to the sort of first main part of the presentation. And this is the metaphysical causal realism. And that is the power conception of causation, which I claim that in Bohm, there's citations which show that he has a similar metaphysical analysis of causation to that of Aristotle's power conception. And in case some of you are not very familiar with Aristotle, I have a few words as a background for this and a comparison of Plato and Aristotle, and then the main features of powers in Aristotle's metaphysical analysis, and then two of those in Bohm. And I need power all the time. So the background, the two ancient Greek giants, Plato established the academy around 385 BC, and Aristotle was his smartest student. And though he didn't become the successor of Plato as the leader of the academy, he left Athens for a few years, and then when came back, he established his own school, museum. So Plato was the teacher of Aristotle, and Aristotle, we can say that Aristotle continued the work of Plato and changed a lot of things in there as well. So what is familiar to, or is widely familiar, is Plato's style of writing in the form of Socratic dialogues, where Socrates is the questioner, and then some Athenian citizen is the, or also some Athenians also act as the respondents. And the respondents, they can be seen as representing various sort of knowledge bases. And the logical structure in the Socratic dialogues is such that the respondent first chooses a thesis, which he is sort of said to defend. And then Socrates poses yes or no questions, such that the respondent is finally led to a conflict, a contradiction. So in Plato's dialogues, there are several logical elements which are sort of crucial for all scientific work. So these are sort of very important logical ideas there for the whole Western science. First of all, the contradiction, which is to be understood as a challenge to research, to challenge to further investigation, because if there's a contradiction, then there must be something wrong with the premises. And in some Plato's dialogues also ambiguities are discussed. For instance, in the dialogue Euthydemus, and it's shown how ambiguities lead to fallacies. And then at the background, there's the idea that classifications are important forms of knowledge, and nature can be classified systematically. And to this purpose is the method of combination and division important. So we can see that the Socratic dialogues are very different from Bohm's dialogues. For in Bohm, the contradiction is not the aim of the dialogue, but the aim of the dialogue is to improve the understanding of the participants of the topic which is discussed, understanding of one's own beliefs, and understanding of the beliefs and suppositions of the other participants. So that's a very different. These are two very different notions of dialogue. Then one important component in Plato's metaphysics is his theory of ideas, which can be understood so that as analogous to geometry, and so that geometrical triangle is the real reality, and what we human beings observe and work with in geometry here is only imitations of reality. So the triangle we can draw is only an imitation of the real geometrical triangle. And in coherence with this theory of ideas is the epistemology of recollection, which means that as we are born, we already possess the knowledge of the ideas. And the ethics of Plato is the kind of virtue ethics. So it's sometimes said that Aristotle developed the scientific prose, but there are of course very different forms of scientific prose, and Aristotle has his own methodological way of writing, which is what is today often called saving the appearances. Aristotle is very famous for his work on logic. For instance, he was the first who defines truth-saving reasoning, that is demonstrative or logically valid reasoning, and inductive reasoning. And he understood that it's not only the syllogistics which is logically valid, but human reasoning has a wide collection of truth-saving forms of reasoning. So in the topics and rhetorics, they include hundreds of forms of reasoning, topics for classifications, fallacies, and so on. And in rhetoric, reasoning for political and forensic speeches and eulogies. And then Aristotle's part of Aristotle's logic is his posterior analytics, the theory of classificatory science. And for our purposes here, his metaphysics, in his metaphysics, the power concept of causation is the interesting thing. In the Nicomachean Ethics, which is a textbook on virtue ethics, the methodology of saving the appearance is perhaps the most prominent and easily to be identified. Then Aristotle wrote a huge number of other works on various subjects of science. So he also did empirical work in biology. So what about the concepts of causation? So we have two main concepts of causal relations. There are others too, of course, but these may be taken as the main ones. And here is a little bit of the history. So the power conception, which for the Greek is the term dynamis, it's actually a wide concept because it means power, capacity and capability and also possibility. So Aristotle in his Metaphysics and Physics has a metaphysical analysis of the notion of dynamism. And my claim is that in Bohm and Hiley, we have two chief elements of which are the same as in the ancient Aristotle's metaphysical analysis. And this is very interesting because in that during the 80s, the Western philosophy of science was much influenced by the Humean empiricist regularity conception, which was very widely accepted. And it's only during the 90s, since the 90s, that there have been work in philosophy of science about the power conception. It is now quite widely studied, exemplified by the books edited by Marmodoro and Maike. But for quite a while it was considered as metaphysics, and metaphysics as something which has to be totally rejected. So the human empiricist regularity conception was the standard for quite a while. And this is, you can imagine that as I've been teaching philosophy and philosophy of science at the business school, then realizing that the empiricist regularity conception is the main notion which is taught there and which the students adopt, then I was inspired to try to work to show that in qualitative research, where you don't have statistical regularities, you still can have causal explanations. So the human notion is based on his strict empiricism, which means that there is knowledge of observable things only. And Hume very explicitly rejected powers as metaphysics, but I have tried to show in some work that it's not actually the Aristotelian notion of powers which he rejects, but the then rationalist notion of powers proposed by Malebranche, for instance, at that time. So in this human notion, causation is nothing but a regularity between two concomitant events. Now, in fact, this is a mistake because causation needed presuppose regularities. Okay, so now we come to Aristotle, so the ancient notion of powers. Aristotle analyzes 4 different aspects in the notion of dynamism. First, the potentiality and actuality, which may not need a lot of explanation. And it means that powers can be in 2 different ways. Powers can be potentially and sort of implicit, potentially, and they can be actualized. So, or exercised. And the second notion, full power, I have found that it may be a little bit difficult to understand and accept, but I believe it's still sort of very, very natural. To put it briefly, it means that there has to be 2 kinds of powers. So 2 different kinds of powers which complement each other. And then the metaphysical analysis of cause, what consists a cause, is that an active and a passive power meet. I have a the next slide is about this full power. But I first say this distinction between rational and irrational powers. So the irrational powers are something which cannot be realized in different ways. So often the most powers of nature are such that can be realized only or actualized only in one way. For instance, that which can heat or break or dissolve in water. That's the only thing they can do. But then rational powers, and that typically means human powers, they can be realized in contrary ways. So human skills, for instance, a doctor can heal and kill, and one who is able to speak can speak and can be silent. So there has to be an element of choice or a decision in these rational powers to be realized. So there's more to it than just the powers, or perhaps the power of choice is also one kind of power. So the fourth point is the hierarchy of powers. And for instance, a human baby has the first order capacity to learn an awful lot of things, to walk or to learn any language. And then when having the capacity to walk, can learn further things, can learn to run and jump, or when having learned English, can learn the English grammar and so on and so on. And the same hierarchy of powers holds also for natural things. But I have not studied to what extent this could be relevant to the causal interpretation or to Bohm also. So I have only focused on these two first things, but let's have this example of the full power, of the notion of full power. A stone flying with sufficient velocity has the power or capacity to break the window, because the window has the power and capacity to break when hit by a flying stone with sufficient velocity. So the stone here is the active power, the power of the stone that is the active component here, and the capacity to break is the passive component. So for a power realist, the cause of the window's breaking is the meeting of these two powers, while for the empiricist, the cause of the window's breaking is the event of the stone hitting the window. So these are very different analyses of what the cause consists of. Now, my claim is that active information is for Bohm an active power in this Aristotelian understanding of active powers. But first we have to see that active information is a causal factor. And here I have two quotations which are meant to show that active information is a cause factor and meaning is the causal effect. I'm not saying that this is the only way Bohm is using the term meaning, but this is one really important way of the meaning, of the use of the term meaning for him. So I shall read these quotations. Information is a difference of form that makes a difference of content, i.e. meaning. So this says that information is something that makes a difference in something else. So that's a sort of kind of quite standard way of understanding what a causal factor is. And the other citation says that in accordance with the suggestions that meaning is the activity, virtual, like in the mind, or actual, that flows out of such information, we are led to regard the movements of the self-active particles as the meaning of this information. So I think this second point says more explicitly that he uses the term meaning for causal effect. Now the metaphysical analysis. So Bohm on powers, two Aristotelian components. He quite explicitly uses the term potentiality and actuality. And here's one example. The information in the radio wave is, in fact, potentially active everywhere, but it is actually active only where and when it can give form to the electrical energy, which in this case is in the radio. So this is to my mind exactly the same use of potentiality as we have in Aristotle. So potentially is something which is not yet in an active state, but it is only actually active when it means a receiver, and this term receiver is in the second quotation. So already this first citation has implied the concept of full power, but this is more explicit in the second citation. This information is only potentially active in the radio wave, but it becomes actually active only when and where there is a receiver which can respond to it with its own energy. So Bohm is using the term receiver for what in the Aristotle literature is called passive power. And I think this is a very good term for the passive power, which may be misleading in some occasions. Let's see, is this okay. Yeah. So I want to ask the chair, do you think this would be a point to stop for a discussion, or shall I continue? What do you think?
It's your choice. We can carry on if you want and have one whole Q&A, or unless you want to have a Q&A now and pick it up later.
Yeah, okay, well, I continue. Oh, I continue, yeah. That's Paavo's suggestion. Yeah, okay. So my second point, I want to introduce one view about the methodology and epistemology of intuitive intelligibility in Bohm. And this is quite different from what William Seeger was discussing in his presentation. And this one I'm speaking here today, it's very closely related to Bohm's social and political ambitions. So I think these are worth mentioning. And here the idea is to bridge science and common sense, and by giving analogical examples of quantum properties of quantum causation, the self-activity and non-locality and holism, but also it holds for the power metaphysics, which the previous citations actually already indicate. So let's take a look at Bohm's ambition briefly. So he wanted to revolutionize the scientific and everyday worldview from the mechanistic Newtonian to the holistic quantum conception. And he thought that this is necessary so that people can see the relationality. So, I mean, holism is closely related to relationality. So how individualistic thinking is completely wrong, and we are all human beings, we are connected to each other, and we are connected to the nature, and we are connected to the whole universe then, after all, according to Bohm's view. So here, this methodology which I'm discussing today is a kind of sort of his tool for this, for carrying out or enhancing this revolution. And this means that he wants to show analogies between quantum mechanics, between the causal relations of quantum mechanics and common experience. So self-activity, non-locality, holism are three sort of particular aspects of quantum causation. And they seem to us, they appear first quite strange and probably mistaken views, but he wants to show that these are actually something which we have in our common experience. And the same holds for the metaphysics of active information. So I'm relying on this thought which is expressed here about what the intuitive intelligibility is. I'll read this. But it is a key part of our intention in this book to help make the theory more intelligible in an intuitive sense, and not merely regard it as a system of equations from which could be derived algorithms permitting a calculation of interesting results. Here we emphasize again that the notion of active information corresponds to a tremendous range of common experience. So what is this common experience here? And so I take it that he wants to, let me say first that what I have done in a paper is to test whether this idea, whether this sort of methodological idea holds in the argument practice of Bohm and Hiley, that intuitive intelligibility relies on common experience, whether he uses this idea systematically. And he does, at least if you take some of his examples, it's actually the same examples are repeated in the several writings. So for instance, these are cases from common experience which are meant to illustrate self-activity. Mistä tämä nyt tuli?
Tuossa tulee mun, mä voin sen pois.
Joo.
Siinä.
Yeah, so self-activity means in connection with the radio that Paavo's phone is self-acting here. So in connection with the radio, it means that the Newtonian principle of correlation between the intensity of the cause factor or the active force, and the intensity of the effect is broken. And this holds for quantum level and radio and ships on autopilot and RNA, DNA cases. They are sort of common experience examples of self-activity. So with the radio, it means that the radio wave, the intensity of the radio wave can be weak, and still the sound of the radio can be very loud. And this is because the radio has its own source of energy. And the same idea holds for these different cases. And for human action, I think one example is a person reading a map. So reading a map, it can have just very little influence, very little effects, but it can have huge effects depending on what goes on in the person's mind. So the idea is that that this initially strange appearing feature of self-activity of quantum causation is just part of our common experience. We only don't pay attention to it because we are quite likely because we are so much influenced by the Newtonian mechanical worldview. And so the revolution which quantum physics and this methodology of intuitive intelligibility can influence is that we first see that these strangely appearing quantum properties, they are not strange at all, they are part of our common experience. And then when we see, if we believe that a quantum level of reality is sort of the basic level of reality, which also sort of influences other levels of reality, then we should be convinced that the Newtonian worldview is wrong and the sort of quantum worldview is the one that is the more correct one. Now, this was about self-activity. Actually, I have not been able to identify sort of similar examples about non-locality, but these are meant to illustrate the idea that reading a sign or perceiving a sign or understanding a sign, this could be taken as a common experience level illustration of non-locality. So if I see the thermometer, I can read it from the distance of 10 centimeters. I can read it from the distance of 1 meter and 2 meters, but not 1 kilometer. So, but to some extent, the meaning of the thermometer, of the information of the thermometer, does not change with the distance. So I take these as possible illustrations of quantum non-locality, which means that the effect is not influenced by the distance of the causal factor. The most important of all is the holism, which means that parts are determined by the whole. And in the quantum case, it means that the quantum potentiality of the whole universe is the determining factor of the quantum particles. So the analogical cases are from organic life, from animals, from plants. And one important illustration is a group dance. So the dancing of the group is determined by one and the same choreography. So these I take to be sort of systematic use of the methodology of intuitive intelligibility as has been determined here. And it's these same examples are repeated in several writings. And I think they work pretty well. So I'm very happy with them. So now we come back again to the power metaphysics and common experience. And here I have the example, more examples about the metaphysical reasoning about full powers. So, so this shows that the sort of the structure of the argument Bohm uses also in the other cases. So here we have the radio, so a technical device, and then another case is from biology, the DNA molecule constitutes a code, that's a kind of language, and that the RNA molecules read this code and are thus in effect informed as to what kind of proteins they are to make. So this is an example of the active power, the RNA, which is received or read by the, DNA is the active component and RNA is the sort of the passive component that receives and responds and or reads these codes. And then some effect follows. And so so these are meant, these are explicitly given a sort of evidence that the same structure of causation holds also in the quantum world. So an electron is something that can significantly respond to information from distant features of its environment. So here's the electron as a sort of so-called passive power, someone that can respond. So now we have discussed the methodology and epistemology of intuitive intelligibility. And if I want to show that it's sort of that there's some epistemic similarity to Aristotle saving the appearances, then of course we have to turn to Aristotle's saving the appearances methodology. So that's our next task. And first I want to say mention the principles, basic steps in Aristotle's methodology. And I have an example which is taken from the first book of the Nicomachean Ethics, how he argues about eudaimonia, how he defines the concept of eudaimonia or good human life or flourishing life, whatever it's translated. And then I want to point out the underlying epistemology. Okay, this is an important citation. Aristotle has no work, no one treatise where he would discuss this methodology. At least it's not, of course, a lot of Aristotle's works have been lost, and it's known that he had a text on methodology, but this has been lost and nobody knows what is in there. But it is citations like this which show the basic ideas in this SA methodology. So I shall read this. We must, so this is from book 7 of the Nicomachean Ethics. And the book 7 discusses akrasia, or weakness of will. So we must here, in connection with weakness of will, as in all other cases, set the phenomena before us, and after first discussing the difficulties, go on to prove, if possible, the truth of all the reputable opinions. This term endoxa is very important. It's very interesting. Reputable opinions about these affections, or failing this, of the greater number and the most authoritative. For if we both resolve the difficulties and leave the reputable opinions, the endoxa, undisturbed, we shall have proved the case sufficiently. Okay, what this gives us is a methodology in 4 steps. So first, laying out the phenomena, and here in connection with ethics, the phenomena is only endoxa. There are no new observations, but for instance, in biology, Aristotle made new observations. So the phenomena includes the endoxa. I'll soon say what the endoxa is. And includes, so the phenomena in general includes endoxa and new observations. And the second step is discussing the difficulties, contradictions, and ambiguities, and sort of weak positions. And then the third step is creating the solution. And fourth step is justifying the solution. And justification has 2 steps: that the problems, the difficulties that have been discussed earlier, they are solved. There are no contradictions, no more ambiguities, and so on. And most part of the endoxa, they are true or saved. They are included in the theory. So the important term is endoxa, and it is defined in the topics as things which seem so to everyone, or to most people, or to the wise to all of them, or to most, or to the most famous and esteemed. So my claim is that this is sort of this notion of endoxa is quite similar to Bohm's common experience, as we have seen illustrated by the examples. So this is where I want to see the similarity. And I'm not sure whether you are ready for the example here. What does the chair think? Shall we leave that later, or shall I go through that now? Yeah, Paavo is thinking.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Paavo is thinking. Paavo is here in the chair. My authority here, and he says I continue. Okay, I continue. The example eudaimonia, which is it's characterized as the highest human goal. So the highest human goal then forms the criteria for the definition, what kind of thing the human good can be, if it's meant to be the highest human good. And in book 1, chapter 4, Aristotle writes that the many do not give the same account as the wise. For the former, the many think it is some plain and obvious thing like pleasure, wealth, or honor. They differ, however, from one another. And some thought that apart from these many goods, there is another which is good in itself and causes the goodness of all these as well. So this latter thought is Plato's theory of ideas. So the good in itself is the idea of good, and this causes the goodness of all other things. It's all other things only imitate the idea of good. And then discussing these difficulties could be something like this. Pleasure is shared by animals, so it cannot be the highest good for human beings. So pleasure cannot be eudaimonia. Honor depends more on those who honor than the person honored. So it cannot be a permanent characteristic of the person. So it's earlier on said that the highest human good, it's something which belongs to the person and cannot be taken easily away. And wealth cannot be the highest human good because it is a means, and it's a means for something, and this something is then higher. This hierarchy of good things is as goal and means is discussed in the first chapter of the Nicomachean Ethics. And then against Plato, there is no one good as cause of all other good things. So these are the sort of counter arguments for the different endoxa, for the different views that have been presented. And then generating the solution, that's the third step. That's the famous function argument in chapter 7 of book 1. And the first one part of the claim is that the human good resides in the function of man. So there's an inductive argument from various arts that there is a function of human beings. So like with the flute player or sculptor or any artist, they have a function playing the flute well and so on. And similarly, then the function of human being is to be a good human being and act in the way that human beings are made for acting. So this function argument ends that the good resides in the function. And then we have the sort of definition of the function. We state the function on man to be a certain kind of life, and this to be an activity or actions of the soul implying or involving a rational principle. So using one's reason is a crucial component of the function of human being, because the kind of rationality and reasoning capacity only humans have. So that distinguishes human beings from other animal creatures. So human good turns out to be activity of soul in conformity with excellence, with virtues. So this is the third step, and the fourth step is justifying the solution. And this is one of my favorite passages in the Nicomachean Ethics. And it says that we must consider it, that is the definition of eudaimonia, however, in the light not only of our conclusion and our premises, but also of what is commonly said about it. For with a two, we view all the facts harmonize, but with a false one, they soon clash. And so perhaps I should say something about this. How do I go back? What do you think? Well, yeah, because the idea is that 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 this endoxa, that human good is pleasure or wealth or honor, they are sort of saved in this definition, so that for the virtuous person who has sort of learned and internalized the virtues, acting according to the virtues is pleasurable. So in this sense, in this very, very particular sense, pleasure is sort of saved in this theory of eudaimonia. And then wealth is saved in that sense that wealth is a precondition of eudaimonia. So for instance, one of the virtues is, mikä on anteliaisuus?
Generous, to be generous.
Generosity.
Generous.
So giving money to your friends in need and so on and so on. So wealth is saved in this notion of eudaimonia in this sense that it is a precondition of good human life. So not just any wealth, but sort of reasonable wealth. And then honor is saved in the sense that that virtuous people are often honored, of course, but there's no guarantee that you are honored if you're a virtuous person, but it often follows virtuous action. So okay, what about the underlying epistemology of this saving the appearances methodology? Now this is actually my favorite citation. So now some of these views have been held by many men and men of old, others by a few persons. And it is not probable that either of these should be entirely mistaken, but rather that they should be right in at least some one respect, or even in most respects. So this means that that when we want to do research on some issue, then we have to first collect the existing opinions about it, and then see how they conflict with each other, and so on. And then it's a reasonable justification if the sort of part of these views which has survived the criticism can be included somehow in the theory, because this what Bohm would say common experience, which also includes scientific research for him, then they are sort of they must have some truth in them. So the similarities between this intuitive intelligibility and saving the appearances methodology is, first of all, that both are non-foundationalist epistemologies. There is no certain basis of knowledge. So this is a very clear distinction to strict empiricism, for which observations form a foundation for science. And here experience in a wide sense is seen as in both of these, experience in a wide sense is seen as a valuable source of knowledge. So this is Bohm-Hiley notion of common experience is, at least it's part of Aristotle's endoxa. And in both views, conflicts within experience need to be explored. So it's time for the summary. And what we have discussed here is the three components of realism in Bohm. So just briefly mention the argument from laws to object and properties, and then causal realism, the power conception of causation, and the methodology and epistemology of intuitive intelligibility. And these two latter points, they can be seen in some way as reflections from Aristotle. First of all, the metaphysics of power, concept of causation in Bohm and Hiley. It's at least the first 2 points in Aristotle's notion of dynamis are the same. And then as far as the methodology and epistemology is concerned, the both are non-foundationalist epistemology, which is underlying both these intuitive intelligibility methodology and Aristotle's saving the appearances methodology. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation with your parallels between Aristotle and Bohm. Pavel, sorry, did I interrupt you? Did you have something to say?
Well, no, not that. No, we were just more. I just said that we stop sharing the screen, so I don't get
sorry.
Technically,
I'm just wondering, would you like to have a break, or would you like to go straight into the Q&A?
Voidaan mennä jatketaanko suoraan vaan, ettei me varmaan tarvita taukoa vai?
Oh, I'm okay like this. Yeah.
We can continue.
We had a nice little early supper with Pavel. So
sure, no problem. We can go straight in then if you want. So yes, we can open it up to everyone. If you would like to ask a question, you can use the raise your hand function, which can be found under reactions at the bottom of your screen, or if it makes you feel more comfortable, you can write your question in the chat. So who would like to go first?
Can I just ask one question straight away connected to the presentation and it's interesting this is to the latter part of the talk which was about this reference to common experience. I was just wondering about the connection to Niels Bohr approach, because Bohr emphasized a lot that in physics we must use classical concepts so that we understand what we are talking about. So in a way, Bohr was, I don't know if we could say that Niels Bohr was using common experience as a way of not trying to develop new concepts, whereas then Bohm was trying to develop new concepts. So he, in a way, Bohm was doing something that was verboten. It was the so-called Copenhagen quantum mechanics. The attitude was that we should not develop new concepts, and Bohm was doing that. But I think Marja-Liisa is correct in the sense that Bohm was trying to justify his new concepts with common experience.
Yeah.
So in a way, he was also maybe a little bit similar to Bohr. I think this is just an interesting question, because one thing when we in the philosophy of physics, one interesting thing is to compare Niels Bohr and David Bohm with each other.
Right. Yeah.
What's the difference? And in a way, I think the way you emphasize the common experience is sort of interesting for that comparison.
Yeah.
I mean,
Thank you, Pavel. Yeah. So I think this is really a charming methodology. So kind of looking at familiar things from a different perspective, and then you see some quite kind of new things. And yeah, I don't know. You want to continue, Paavo?
Well, maybe a little bit. Just that of course, what we could say that Bohm was doing was he was sort of extending these. We could say that in something like the active information, you can give all these examples. Quite a few of them are artifactual devices like radios. So human beings have made these technological things, right? Radio receivers or autopilots. But then there is also this notion of DNA molecule or reading a map.
Yeah.
And so he wants to take this kind of notion that's familiar to us and extend that to the quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
And of course, there a lot of people would object, and I think still object. I think physicists many physicists don't like the idea at all. They don't even mention it. Even the Bohmians, there's this group of physicists call themselves Bohmian mechanics.
Right. Yeah.
They don't even mention it. I mean, somebody once just noted, he was, writing about information in the Bohm theory. So he just said, I note that Bohm and Hiley use active information, but they don't want to say anything about it. So sometimes I feel that this idea is just in a way so radical when you try to bring it to physics that physicists they just don't buy it, or don't even want to hear about it. And this is sort of ironical because I think anybody who looks into physics, modern physics, you see all kinds of strange ideas being suggested. 11 dimensions, string theory. You take this or that. I mean, sometimes it feels there's no rules or no limit at all to what they can propose. All kinds of very funny ideas. But this is something about this Bohm's idea of active information that, in some ways, it's just too much. It's sort of too. Maybe it's a bit like panpsychism or something like that. That people, So this is in a way my question is that even though Bohm was appealing to common experience, he could not sell this idea to the physicist.
Yeah. Well, I think it's partly because this common experience kind of references are not taken seriously. It took me a few years to sort of start thinking that, okay, let's see what's the role of these repeating these same examples about the radio and reading map and things like that. So, and then I wanted to test whether these could be taken seriously as a real sort of methodological approach. And then when you see that he had some writings says that this holds for natural things, this holds for biology, this holds for technical things, this holds for human action. So it's a kind of inductive argument. So why shouldn't it hold also for the quantum level? So it's this kind of sort of inductive. It's actually a rhetorical induction from several cases to one further case. So, and then,
yes,
but then would you like to give your hunch why Bohm's theory is not, well, here I'm only talking about the causal interpretation. This should be emphasized. So do you have a hunch why this notion of active information hasn't been sort of accepted by so many of the physicists?
There could be physical reasons, and I'll say a bit about that. But just before that, I think it's interesting because even in the Bohm and Hiley undivided universe, they discuss this again. They like, why do we want? They try to justify why they want to put active information to quantum level, and they say precisely what you were saying, that in a way, one option is that quantum mechanics is just a recipe, just a mathematical formalism that we use to predict experiments, but we have no idea of what's going on. We have no this intuitive or intelligible picture. And in a way, Bohm was saying, if we want to have this intuitive, intelligible, we need something like active information. So he's actually arguing that in one part of this undivided universe. So in a way, the way Bohm is putting is that it's okay, it's up to you. You know, there's no absolute need perhaps to have it. I mean, we can use quantum mechanics without this kind of story. Because we know we can use the mathematics, you know, people are using it already. I mean, our technology, our mobile phones, everything is sort of based on applications of quantum mechanics. So we know how to use it. Question is, should we also have a story about what it tells us about reality and you know, about the quantum objects? And Bohm says then, yeah, if we want that story, then you are going to need something like this active information. Now you see, but then of course the question is whether Bohm thought this is literally true. You see, this is another thing where we could make a distinction. Whether Bohm saw this as a tool for intuition and intelligible, like more like a story, which we shouldn't take too literally. You see, it is possible that he himself wasn't necessarily thinking this is the absolute and final truth, but maybe people read it like that, and then they will say, well, for that picture, the electron must have internal structure and complex, a bit just like a radio receiver has to have some structure in order to respond to radio wave. Then the particle should have this kind of structure. And then some people, physicists, they may be used to think, well, the electron is a point particle. It cannot have this kind of structure. There are other physicists like Dehmelt who suggest that even the electron does have some structure in it. But I don't know if anybody has connected that to, any physicist has connected that to this idea. And so there are these kinds of worries that, but there are some, I mean, you know, there are some people who have actually discussed this active information idea in quantum mechanics. Even some physicists, they think about it, and some have criticized it, but most just ignore it. They just, you know, they just they probably think this is new age, or, you know, this is not serious, or, you know, Bohm just, you know, spend too much time with the gurus or something like that. I don't know. They just don't say anything about it. And this is the puzzling thing that that way, you know, why this discussion happened like that.
Yeah. Okay. So what about other questions, comments, thoughts, ideas?
Yeah, we do have a few now. Let's invite Gary first.
So I would, I think the concept of intuitive intelligibility is critically important. It brings the ontological aspect into focus in addition to the epistemological. I think that Bohr's objection was that there is no reliability of and provability, if you will, of an intuitive intelligibility, even though we all apply intuitive intelligibility in our daily lives. The thing I wanted to bring up is that there is another interpretation called the transactional interpretation, which fully recognizes the wave equation has two solutions. It has a real solution and it has a complex solution. And the way that's been interpreted is that any exchange of information, in that it is active, involves a two-way symmetrical interaction. You have an emitter that is sending out information, but the receiver has to be prepared to receive the information. It is a mutual exchange. And in the transactional interpretation, particularly Ruth Kastner's version of it, what happens in quantum world, which is outside of space-time, is that there is an exchange of information going on between the potential emitter and the potential absorber that then negotiates the exchange, which then becomes actual. So I guess the point I would like to suggest is that this idea of intuitive intelligibility brings out the other aspect, right? The response of the receiving aspect of the active information, that to be active, the information not only has to be sent out, but it has to be actively received. I wonder if you would comment on that.
Well, I'm not sure whether I can say much more about that, but I think that's yeah. So this is very, very interesting. Thank you for that.
But doesn't the Kastner view, I mean, I'm not familiar enough with it, but do they talk there about this also, like backward in time? You know, one way coming from the future.
The complex solution of the wave equation is a confirmation wave, implies a confirmation wave coming back from a potential absorber. So if you have an atom, for example, that has extra energy and it wants to send out a photon, and in order to reduce its energy state, it sends out an offer wave. But the offer wave has to have a responding wave coming back from a potential absorber before there is an actual exchange. There has to be a handshake, if you will, a negotiation between the emitter and the absorber in quantum land, right? Outside of space-time, the negotiation occurs. Then, once the negotiation is completed, there is the exchange of the information in actuality. So there is this territory of potentiality, which you talked about a little bit, this territory of potentiality. And the question is, what is going on in that territory of potentiality that then leads to an actual event, right? What is that relationship? And the transactional interpretation says, well, there is a clear relationship, because what's happening is that in potentiality, there is a potential interaction that then gets completed only when there is an exchange, a handshake, if you will.
Yeah.
And this also goes back to Feynman Wheeler, who talked about this in their electrodynamic theory. But there is an exchange that precedes the actual transmission of the whatever it is that's going across between the receiver and the emitter and the receiver.
Yeah.
I maybe comment to, if you put it like that in terms of, you know, one level at the level of potentiality and then actuality, then it perhaps is more intuitively intelligible. I think sometimes people do put these things in terms of something moving backwards in time, and sort of the future influencing the present, and that is of course more difficult to understand. I mean, we have ideas of retrocausality, you know, Hugh Price, going back to Beauregard and others, Ken Wharton, and so there are a number of these retrocausal models, but somebody has their mic on, we get an echo. But anyway, the way you describe this is rather interesting. I gotta check it out. I have Kastner's book somewhere, so I need to look at it. So thanks.
Yeah. So what I was that this was sort of more expanding and elaborating the point which I made very briefly only. Is that how you meant it? Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Let me
Joo, toihan on tosi tärkeä juttu.
Sorry, me and Gary are sitting opposite each other. That's why there was a bit of a feedback. But thank you, Gary, anyway, for coming in with your contribution. Next, we'll go to Paul.
Kukas se on?
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you very much for shows me to unmute, but I think I am unmuted. Wanted to thank you for the presentation. I enjoyed it tremendously, and I feel you are right on when you say that this conceptual approach that you offered is really applicable to so many other questions that have been difficult to deal with. And one, I was wondering whether you would agree with, applying it also to the very hot question of the nature of human consciousness, not only in relation to the effect on the quantum physics level, but in general, and obviously the issue of what is primary, consciousness, mind, or is it matter? It's an old philosophical question for a couple of thousand years, and now it's becoming very hot when it comes to human consciousness. And it occurred to me that from what you said, it would be very easy to look at what we know at this point is that the vast non-local field of consciousness that is around us is potentially active. And then it actually becomes acutely active when it interacts with the brain, which then plays a role with who is likely to experience at the non-ordinary states, the timing and the intensity of it. But it's really a interactional or transactional act that results in human consciousness.
Yeah, so you're referring to this conception or metaphysics of causality.
Yeah, the potentially active. And
Actually, yeah. Well, I believe that it's a sort of universally valid distinction. So I don't know what to say anything more about it, and so it seems that this is also how Bohm and Hiley understand it in this context of causal interpretation, at least. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Paul, for coming in. Next, we have a question from the chat, which asks, can you say something about the concept of soma significance and assign somatic relating to your presentation as in information? I'm guessing it's in relation to active information.
Yeah, well, I know a little bit about these distinctions, but in this context, I would prefer not to speak about that. I'm sorry, but it's such a different view than what is involved in this causal interpretation. So I think it should then it needs a very separate discussion, and it's not in my mind right now. Yeah, sorry for that. But perhaps Paavo will.
Yeah, I might say
something about
well,
that.
because you see, I think for Bohm they were connected in the sense that he would, for example, he would say that this. I think in one of your slides, Marja-Liisa had this idea how the first of all that this difference of form makes a difference of content or meaning, but also then that the meaning of the information can be seen in the movement of the particles, and that so that the movement of the particles is the meaning of information, right? Yeah. And this is for
one sense of
Yeah.
meaning, but
Yeah,
that's only
that's
one
right.
sense.
But this
Yeah,
would
yeah.
this for Bohm in a way would be a signosomatic effect,
Mm,
because this is where meaning actually has a physical effect. I mean, it could be a kind of causation also, but then in the reverse, when I'm reading a newspaper and those forms of the letters make a difference of content in my mind, that would be the soma significant direction. So where the soma is carrying a significance, like, you know, those printed marks or signs carry a meaning when you're reading the ink. Ink is carrying a meaning, and so that would be soma significance. And then when you understand what it means and react, that would be signosomatic. And so if it says in the newspaper that you will get an iPhone for 50% if you go to the store before 12 o'clock, to understand that is soma significance, but then to go to the store and run to the store before everybody else is signosomatic.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I mean, it's just to, you know, that, but of course, then, you know, there's more to explore there, but
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Paavo.
yeah. No.
Thank you, Paavo, and thank you for that person who wrote that question in the chat. Next, we will go to Niels. Bearing in mind just to keep your question short and just be respectful of everyone else in the room.
Yes.
But, go ahead, Niels.
Yes. I'm used to be quite a distractive force in this, but I will just try and be very simple in what I want to talk about. I want a specific question is that you have this saving appearances. Has that to do with getting eggs on your face or something? I didn't quite catch what that was.
Yeah, sorry. Could you please-
Aristotle, yes, saving appearance.
Yes.
Is that, yes, humiliation, yes.
Mitä se tarkoittaa?
You mean humiliation?
Well, that kind of thing, if you are talking to people and they dislike what you're saying, they might throw eggs at you. So you have to save your appearance.
No. No.
Could you explain to me what that is?
Well, I think there's no no direct relation.
It doesn't say, click with anything in my mind, really.
Yeah, I can't see any relation. Well, Aristotle, yeah, it's not, well, it's a kind of action, and well, would you count it somehow as part of the endoxa? Aristotle says that the endoxa, it doesn't include opinions of people with mental problems, or it doesn't include opinions of children who don't have enough experience yet.
Yeah.
But then he does say that endoxa could be expressed in action.
Yeah.
So yeah, I find it difficult to think about that in such abstract terms. It would be easier if we had some particular case to discuss,
Yes.
but perhaps this is not the
That's,
place for that.
Well, yes, during the presentation, as in all presentations, I come back to a transportation, understanding transportation in all its flavors and complexities. I think that is, as far as I can see, that is to do with bits and moving and trajectories, finding the best solutions and things like that, like the Lagrangians. And so I would be very interested in trying to explain something about that, because then we have got something concrete. I think I think Alfred North Whitehead was talking about concretisence, or something concrete. If you have something concrete, you can also evolve ideas of how does cause effect work. And we have personally, I have some things that could actually be useful for this general discussion of Bohm's work.
Yeah, feel free to share it on.
Yeah,
on Sutra and
I
discuss
can't
it.
do it in 5 minutes, but I'm just saying that we have some examples that mirrors the capacity and these other activity, interaction, and all these things, all these categories.
Excellent.
And in my work, it resonates with the brain, because it has this wholeness thing, like if you take you recognizing the part as whole, and of every part as whole, is quite natural. And some people, I've heard the definition of that is that this is how God thinks.
Yeah.
So there's some depth in this.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay, thanks
you.
very much for that. Thanks.
Okay.
Maybe you take the next one. Yeah.
If you want me to do a presentation of this, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. It was a very good talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Anna.
All of this, I kept making me think of movement and process. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Am I unmuted? Yes, movement and process, which was so important to David in his physics and philosophy. And in the simplest way, because I have to come at it from an intuitive way rather than a knowledgeable, scholarly way. I'm reminded of, even in our language, how words which evoke movement seem to move us forward in the process of our conversation. And I think this is why David was keen on dialogue, because he thought that the movement in it, or possible movement of consciousness, of particles, could move us along to another understanding. It's not the only thing, but I can't really comment on the physics.
My view of the dialogue is that it's very important for this revolution of worldviews from Newtonian to the sort of holistic worldview, and that also in the dialogue you can have experience of relationality, of yourself being sort of determined, defined by the others. So what you are in the dialogue depends on what the others do and say. And that means that you are not your being is not independent of the actions and presence of the others. So so this is an idea which is a very sort of very much against the Newtonian atomistic worldview. So this is not directly connected what you just said, but perhaps you may take this as a comment as an additional comment of the
I think the
role of dialogue. Sorry.
The connectivity is very important.
Exactly. Yes.
Communication with all the things that are held in the word. Communication. And it applies to humans as well as
Yes.
bigger cosmos.
Right, yeah. So I think I used the word relationality in a close sense, similar to how I understand what you mean by connectivity now. Yes, thank you.
Thank you both. Good to see you, Pavel.
Yes, good to hear.
It's been a long
Long
time.
time.
It's really nice to see
Yeah.
you talking about connectivity and relationality.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Thank you, Anna. It's great to see you at our events. So I can see that we've got about 15 minutes left, and I cannot see any questions. I was thinking, Pavel and Marja, don't know if you have any comments or about the whole Beyond Bohm, the Bohm and Philosophy series has been going. If there's any conclusions that we can draw and how to move forwards from this.
Jotain kommenttia noihin
Ai
muihin.
mulla.
Niin, siis sillä jos haluat sanoa, eikä mäkin voin sanoa jotain, mutta jos haluat sanoa ensin jotain noista, mitä sä oot nähnyt
Well,
näistä
yeah,
muista.
sorry, I didn't understand you wanted to ask me. So yeah, not immediately. No, I think this has been very, very interesting, and I have learned a lot, and I'm very grateful for these comments I have received and that you've been patient with listening to my lecture. But I'm sure Paavo may have some.
Well, yeah. So I mean, this was an interesting. The idea came up, I guess, I wonder early this year. I don't know exactly when. It was perhaps Beth Macy who had suggested something like this to do it with philosophy, and then we took things from there. And I think it's been great to have these people engaged. Of course, with we had in the beginning, I did some things, and then with Petteri and Basil, and then we had 3 talks, which were perhaps more, in some ways, more traditional academic presentations or explorations, which hopefully has worked out in the sense that, you know, we started out perhaps with the more free general discussion as a warm-up, and now I think we've gone sort of perhaps deeper with some of these presentations with Bill Seeger and Marai Konstrian, and now Marja-Liisa Kakkuri-Knuuttila, and actually I'm quite excited about this. We haven't done something like this before. I mean, of course, we've been in various conferences. Marai, I know her work, but I never heard her give a talk or interacted with her. And I can certainly think that we could continue these themes in the future. There is of course this sort of I don't know, with Bill Seeger's discussion. Do you want to say something about Bill? What do you got out of that, or?
Oh no, I thought that was a very, very interesting presentation, and I was very happy. It had some connection to my presentation, but it had a very different approach, and what he found relevant for intelligibility was very different from what I'm discussing here now. So of course, I would like to hear what he thinks about my attempt, but yeah.
Maybe we'll come to that point. I guess one if we think of this question of intelligibility, which, you know, it's something that's understandable, or I don't know what other words we would use for you know, when we try to make sense of things, we try to make them intelligible, rational, or whichever concept we are using. Bohm liked to use this intuitive intelligibility, like what Marja-Liisa has, that there has to be also this kind of some kind of understanding, not just mathematics, but also some sort of what he would call intuitive understanding. But I think as in philosophy, I think one realizes that almost that there could be, I'm not saying a danger there, but a potential problem in the sense that what I find intelligible is relative to what I know. And suppose that I had very old-fashioned thinking habits and I'm completely stuck in the mechanistic view or whatever, then I will not necessarily understand if somebody comes with new ideas or with holistic something, a new way of thinking. And therefore the just to demand intelligibility can be a restriction as well. And here this would be one way of trying to understand Bohm. And here I'm making use of Marja-Liisa's presentation, is that Bohm was, you see, people who would reject the holistic ideas might rely on common experience with very mechanistic situations. And therefore, I don't understand. And what Bohm was doing, he was saying, well, in our common experience, there are many cases of more holistic phenomena as well. But because of our scientific tradition, we emphasize the mechanistic parts, and therefore we ignore the holistic ones. And in a way, what his rhetorics, perhaps an Aristotelian knows, but his rhetorics was more like, well, it's not impossible to understand these holistic aspects of quantum mechanics. And even in common experience, we can have things that help us. I think this is very much like, I think what Marja-Liisa has sort of given us today is this trying to really bring out this feature of Bohm's thinking, and of course the connection to Aristotle. The way Aristotle was thinking about things is very interesting. That and I guess one could argue that Aristotle, in some ways, was also a holistic thinker in his own way. And I know that Bohm appreciated. I mean, he from time to time he would actually refer to Aristotle, so he kind of recognized that this was perhaps more with the idea of causation. Not only do we have material cause and efficient, but also the formal and the final. So I think he felt that the way Aristotle was thinking about causation fits very well with quantum field theory, where particles emerge out of process and are sort of crystallized. But anyway, so and the other thing, I think yesterday what we had with this causality indeterminism, that was also very interesting, because Marai, she had really focused very much on the way this dialectical materialism might have influenced Bohm's thinking, and the way there you have this idea of these many levels and also this idea of infinite complexity, and the way this is sort of that we could, to understand how Bohm was thinking, then this would be of great help. And she has written very good papers about this as well, like Marja-Liisa has written also. One of them is in Finnish, and I think there's an English one that you will publish soon. So I think we got many things to think about, and but I guess in the future we could perhaps, if we continue, we might try to discuss further these things, perhaps bringing some other people, and who knows, even to do a physical meeting in Pari, if we can find a way of doing that. That would be great to keep up the theme of it. Now that we've started, there's no way of stopping. But I can see there's one more question there, so we can maybe we take it away.
Just ask just a follow-up about this. Well, first of all, of course, you're always invited to come here in person and to have this event. But the question I had for you as a follow-up is that usually when we do talk about Bohm, when we have these kind of series where we have you and Basil talking together, physics seems to always be on the forefront of the course or event or conference. This time it went a bit differently, where we put philosophy on the forefront, mainly analytical philosophy. Sure, we did have a session with Basil Hiley, but we mostly talked about philosophy of science or philosophy. Do you think we gained something by putting philosophy on the forefront, or have we lost something in bit around the course? What do you think is gained by doing this?
Well, I don't know. I mean, do you want to comment?
Yeah. Well, no, because I'm a philosopher, I think the philosophical understanding is sort of valuable.
Yes.
So, but that may not be a fair answer. So, but then I think it would be, I think there's an awful lot of work to do, seeing how these different, like how these, the philosophy in the implicate order theory and in this causal interpretation, how they relate to each other. And so, because I'm just talking about this causal interpretation, and then there are sort of similar issues related with this implicate order. And so I would be happy to see someone else working on that in a sort of detailed way.
Yes, and I think also we could say that David Bohm was himself using actually philosophy as a tool in physics. And it's not many physicists who do it, but if you read some of his early papers from the 60s, there's one paper that perhaps started this implicate order movement, and the first, it's called Space, Time, and Quantum Theory Understood as Discrete Structural Process. And at least the first part of the paper is complete philosophy. There's hardly any physics, no mathematics. It's all discussion. I think Bohm believed that in order to develop new physics, we also first have to have our conceptual foundations clear. And it's obvious that he was using philosophy. I mean, sometimes physicists start with mathematics and they make a big breakthrough through that. So Bohm wasn't claiming that this is the only way. He was actually saying that we should use both philosophy and physics, physical notions. But I think it's maybe the tendency in physics has been to be a bit sloppy on the philosophical side, or on the side of concepts, and focus on the mathematics. And Bohm did not like that. He always suffered when there was no discussion of the ideas. So in a way, we're doing a very Bohmian thing by putting philosophy first here, and perhaps sort of and he has a tremendous amount of writing and work, which is more on the philosophical side, which we haven't explored. I mean, all the correspondence, various long correspondences he had, many of the papers that we could also, I mean, there's still some ideas there to explore and move forward. Of course, in some ways it's not, and I think the purpose is not just to study Bohm for its own sake, but actually see whether the kind of ideas that he initiated help us to tackle the problems that are out there for everybody to think about, more objective problems. And I think the reason why people get excited about Bohm, because they feel that the way he's thinking, or the way he's approaching question might be, is somehow giving light to those problems. I don't know, maybe what Marja-Liisa or Marai or William, I mean, the people we've had in this series or Petteri, who work with philosophy and feel in some ways attracted to Bohm's ideas, that I guess there is something there that we feel that we're seeing something through them, but not only seeing Bohm, but we're actually using them as to see some of these things which are valuable to us and interesting to us. And I don't know if that's enough to justify a further focus on philosophy, but without.
No, it was. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, no justification needed, really, but yeah. Thank you, Papo. So we have a couple of minutes. Maybe we can take the last question from Pam.
Hi. I'm muted, am I?
We can hear you.
Oh, you're muted now.
That's okay.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So a million thanks. This whole series has just been magical for me. I just want to put a little reflection in here, because in no way can I possibly add anything that's of any import to this discussion, but as a conceptual artist who has been extremely influenced by David Bohm, I feel a bit like the radio, you know, as the receiver of his ideas, which have allowed me, with no background whatsoever, to understand fairly well the ideas of the implicate, the super implicate, and the explicate orders over a long period of time. And the way I've come about this really is because I could see it. So he made something clear. And now I suppose really we're talking about intuitive intelligence. And I loved the Aristotelian connection with Bohm's ideas. So that's just all I wanted to say. I think maybe art still has a little place to pump something into physics and philosophy as well, because I was searching for some answers through physics and I did find some. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. And yes, of course, we actually had a comment in the chat saying that it would be interesting to do a series on Bohm's interactions with artists, for example, Biederman. So yeah, thank you. Great. Well, unfortunately, I guess we need to start wrapping up. Pavan, Marja, anything to leave us with before we close?
Well, yes, I just want to thank you for this opportunity. It's been really a pleasure and very interesting to be part of this series and hear the other talks. And then I feel very proud of being a member of this group. So I want to thank the organizers and Paavo again for it's been so nice to be sitting here with Paavo. Yes, so I wish you good luck for continuing this kind of work.
Yes, yes, and absolutely. Thanks, everybody. I mean, you know, it's a special way to be together on Saturday, Sunday night. We could do other things like watch football or whatever. And we're doing these kinds of things. And thanks very much, of course, to the Pari Center for hosting these events. And also good luck. You have an on-site event starting. So we wish you good luck with all that, and hope to see you also in person at some point again.
Thank you so much. Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marja, for your fantastic presentation. Thank you for everyone who contributed to the discussion, whether it was through questions or chat or just being there. Of course, thank you so much, Pavel. Thank you for putting this program together. It's been wonderful through your contributions and your help behind the scenes. It really made this series really special. And of course, I would also like to extend a very great thanks to Eleanor, my mum, who's been behind the scenes, making sure everyone got here okay. And yeah, so a great thank you to her. So yeah, before we go, I don't have any announcements about upcoming series apart from the one that is starting in person here in Pari tomorrow. On the it's called Reenchanted Universe. We are working on our autumn programs. So subscribe to our newsletter, have a look on our website because there will be a few announcements coming up. Also on Sutra, we will keep that open. We will announce some stuff there as well. So keep an eye on that. In the meantime, you can contact us on our website or on email directly, eleanor@paricenter.com to contact Eleanor. Yeah, so it's been wonderful. Thank you everyone so much. We'll see you again soon here at the Pari Center. Bye-bye.